30 seconds ago, the balance of power in Britain cracked. Not with an election, not with a vote, but with a decision that was never supposed to happen. The Prince of Wales stepped beyond the line drawn for him generations ago, and in doing so, forced a government into open retreat. What began as a routine legislative announcement has now escalated into the most volatile confrontation between Crown and Parliament in modern times. The consequences are still unfolding, and they may not stop at Westminster. The trigger came early yesterday, when the government quietly released the final draft of its National Development and Settlement Bill. On paper, it was framed as an urgent solution to a housing shortage. In reality, buried within its clauses were powers that alarmed even seasoned civil servants, mandatory redevelopment zones across rural counties, accelerated land acquisition with limited right of appeal, financial sanctions against councils that resisted central targets. The language was clinical. The impact was anything but. Within hours of the bill's publication, word reached Kensington Palace. According to sources close to the household, the prince had already seen fragments of the proposal weeks earlier. What he saw then disturbed him. What he read yesterday confirmed his fears. Entire villages would be redrawn by decree. Farms held by the same families for generations could be seized with compensation set far below market value. Local objections would be logged, acknowledged, and ultimately ignored. By mid-morning, calls were being placed. Quiet ones at first. Senior MPs from multiple parties reported receiving direct contact, not from aides, but from the prince himself. The message was not theatrical. It was precise, restrained, and deeply personal. This was not about ideology. This was about irreversible damage to communities that could not be rebuilt once erased. Inside Downing Street, confusion turned rapidly into panic. Ministers who had spent months assuring one another the bill would pass without resistance now found their own backbenchers wavering. Rural representatives began distancing themselves publicly. Party whips struggled to contain dissent. By lunchtime, the numbers no longer held. But the real rupture came when the prince's words began circulating privately among MPs. He spoke of land he had walked, not glanced at from briefing papers. Of families he had sat with, not referenced in impact assessments, of promises made after wars and crises that Britain would protect those who fed it and stewarded its land. He did not accuse, he reminded, and for many that was worse. While the political class scrambled, the people affected were already living the consequences. In Lincolnshire, a mixed-use farm operated by the Clark family since the 1950s received formal notice of compulsory acquisition. The valuation offered would not cover outstanding loans. In Herefordshire, a village council learned its objections carried no legal weight under the new framework. In Northumberland, a livestock auction was cancelled after 3 farmers lost access to credit overnight. Their land suddenly deemed unstable collateral. One of them, a widower in his late 60s, told local radio he felt as though the country had decided he was expendable. His children had already left. His land was all he had left to pass on. Now it belonged, in theory at least, to a plan he had never voted for. As these stories spread, the contrast became impossible to ignore. While rural livelihoods collapsed in silence, headlines emerged detailing ministerial travel budgets, consultancy fees, and public relations contracts tied to the same development agenda. Anger began to travel faster than policy ever could. By evening, the prince's intervention could no longer be contained. At a previously scheduled event attended by agricultural leaders, he spoke without notes. Those present described the room falling quiet before the first sentence was finished. He did not name the bill. He did not name the Prime Minister. He spoke instead of trust, of stewardship, and of the danger of mistaking speed for progress. When he finished, the applause did not feel celebratory. It felt like release. What followed was immediate. The markets reacted sharply. Construction stocks dipped, the currency wavered. Social media erupted with footage from the event, clipped and shared millions of times within hours. Support poured in from places the government had long considered safe. The narrative had shifted, and it was no longer one ministers could control. Late last night, a senior official described the mood inside government as brittle. Emergency meetings were called, draft statements rewritten, allies urged restraint. Critics sensed blood, and at the centre of it all stood a monarchy that had broken its silence, not loudly, but decisively. This is no longer a debate about housing. It is a test of authority, legitimacy, and the limits of obedience. And Britain has not yet seen how far it will go. By dawn, the shock had hardened into something more dangerous. What began as disbelief inside Westminster turned into open fracture. Cabinet members arrived early, avoiding cameras, phones pressed to ears, faces drawn. Overnight polling landed on desks like a warning shot. Support for the bill had collapsed. Support for the prince had not. In constituencies that had not voted against a government in decades, MPs were suddenly being told they would not survive the week if they did not break ranks. Behind palace walls, the atmosphere was no calmer. Senior advisers urged restraint, warning that every additional word risked pulling the monarchy deeper into the political storm. The prince listened, but did not retreat. Those close to him say he believed the moment had already passed the point where silence preserved neutrality. Silence now, in his view, would be read as consent. The tension reached the top of the royal household late that night. A private meeting stretched for hours. Voices were raised. Warnings were given. History was invoked. The argument was not about policy, but precedent, about whether the crown could survive appearing to choose sides. The prince's response was measured but unyielding. He did not argue that the monarchy should govern. He argued that it should not watch the country unravel without consequence. Outside those walls, the country was already choosing. In market towns and county seats, impromptu gatherings formed. Tractors lined roads not in anger, but in visibility. Church halls filled with residents who had never attended a protest in their lives. Handwritten signs appeared, not demanding revolution, but asking to be seen. For many, the prince's intervention had articulated a frustration they had carried quietly for years. Internationally, the reaction was just as revealing. Allied leaders spoke cautiously, but their words landed heavily. Comments about cultural preservation, democratic consent, and social cohesion were interpreted for what they were. Diplomatic language rarely hides intent for long. The government felt the chill immediately. Trade briefings were delayed. Investor calls were postponed. Confidence, once shaken, proved difficult to restore. Inside Parliament, the bill's fate was effectively sealed before it reached the floor. Amendments were floated, then withdrawn. A pause was announced, then extended. Officially, ministers insisted they were listening. Unofficially, aides admitted the numbers were gone. The Prime Minister, once confident the legislation would define his tenure, now faced the possibility it might end it. What made the moment so destabilizing was not the scale of protest, but its source. This was not an opposition revolt. It was not driven by activists or rivals. It came from an institution designed to endure precisely by not intervening. That breach, once made, could not be undone. For the prince, the cost was personal as much as constitutional. Support surged, but so did scrutiny. Every past speech, every patronage, every environmental position was re-examined for motive. Critics accused him of overreach. Supporters accused him of waiting too long. The line he crossed did not disappear behind him. It remained sharp and visible. And yet, for the families watching surveyors walk their fields, for councils told their objections no longer mattered, for communities that felt erased by spreadsheets and targets, the debate felt almost academic. Their lives were already in suspension, futures already deferred. What they saw, perhaps for the first time in years, was someone powerful saying the system could not simply roll over them and move on. As the week closed, the government announced a formal review. The language was careful, no apology, no admission, but the momentum had shifted. The bill that was meant to reshape Britain now stood as a symbol of how close it had come to tearing it apart. Whether this moment becomes a footnote or a turning point will depend on what follows, on whether power recalibrates or hardens, on whether the line that was crossed becomes a bridge or a fault line. One thing is already certain. The illusion that nothing fundamental could change without permission is gone. And Britain, quietly but unmistakably, has entered a different chapter.